Are you ready for rapid fire?
Yes, sir. You know it. This is my favorite part. I just kind of said, well, I guess I'll talk about Rodney Dunham committing and all that, but I want to do rapid fire. So
Here we
I'm very
go.
excited.
Here we go. Brian was like, don't throw any baseball questions at me. So don't worry. There are no baseball questions in
Thank
rapid
you.
fire today. All right. We've got the blue gold game, of course, coming up here in a couple of days. The number one question going into Notre Dame's spring practice was, of course, who's going to be the starting quarterback? Who's going to win the job? Perhaps the number one question now coming out with the transfer portal opening up in a week is, will any of these quarterbacks hit the portal when it's all said and done? So on a scale of 1 to 10, as we sit here right now, how confident are you that all three of the quarterbacks involved in this competition are going to be here when fall camp begins?
I'm at a 7.5. I don't want to go quite to 8. And honestly, if you were to ask me, okay, so you think one of them's going to transfer? I don't know. I don't think so. They all three seem to be very bought in. They all seem to be willing to compete. All three of them are still in the battle right now. I don't think a decision has been made. And I don't think a decision has been made from the standpoint of they're just not going to tell anyone because they want them to come back. I don't think anyone has technically has gone out and just won the job right now, which is why you don't need to tell one of the three that they're not going to win it because they're all still in it, in my opinion. But I also think that at some point in time, you have to start making some business decisions and say, look, especially the two older kids, Kenny and Steve, because you're getting a little bit closer to just not having eligibility. Can you afford to go into the fall battle and not win it? And, maybe one of them decides not to. I hope not, because I think they're all great kids. I want them all to compete. I love the depth at the position, and I want them all to get their degrees from Notre Dame. So I hope none of them leave, but this is also the modern era where I'd be a fool to sit there and say, no, they're all fine. They all love Notre Dame. They're going to be – just because you love Notre Dame doesn't mean you don't also value your own future and your own opportunities that may lead to you going somewhere else. You can love Notre Dame, but I just didn't work out, and I'm not going to be the guy. And I have aspirations to play professional football and to be a starter, and that's just not going to happen for me here. And just because kid does that doesn't mean everything he said about loving Notre Dame isn't still true. But he's got to look out for himself at some point in time once the spring's over with.
Yeah, Al Golden loved Notre Dame too, but he decided that there was a different career opportunity for him out there, so he could leave Notre Dame, still leave it behind and go someplace else. Just like you can love your home, your hometown, whatever, but you can leave, branch out, and find other opportunities.
I love my parents, but I live over 800 miles away from them because that's just what's best for me and my wife.
That's exactly right. I'm feeling around a 6, 7 as well, but I think back to, it's amazing this was only 2 years ago, but it's 3 springs ago when you had Sam Hartman, Tyler Buckner, Steve Angeli, and Kenny Minchey in that quarterback room. And it's, look at this quarterback room, look at the future, that's out there. Now, obviously you still have 2 of those guys around, but the Tyler Buckner part of it, I think it surprised most of us that he bolted after the spring and headed down to Alabama. And obviously, he's figured out that maybe the grass, wasn't greener.
I wonder, and I've thought about this too, Sean. I wonder your thoughts on this. Do you think what happened with Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner after they left Notre Dame might factor into their minds? Just because you leave doesn't mean you're going to get that opportunity somewhere else. And look what happened with Tyler. Look what happened with Drew Pine.
Drew Pine going on his 4th school now. You're absolutely right. I think that, especially this group, because they're all really smart, and they're, and they all have, a ton of talent as well. But obviously only one guy is going to get this job. But I think that is a great point. When you look at a guy like Drew Pine, who, put in his time, a guy who, self-proclaimed loved Notre Dame as well, but he decided to bounce obviously for greener pastures and look for a new opportunity. And now he's going on to school number 3, 3 years down the road. So maybe that is
for Drew.
Well, school number 3 in terms of that he transferred to. School number 4 overall. Yeah.
And the selling point is listen, guys, I know doesn't look good for you now, but let's not forget about this. In 2010, 2011, 2012, 2014, 2015, 2017, 2018, 2021. 2022. all those years, we know what they all had in common. At least 2 quarterbacks started a game
There you
because
go.
of injury or somebody getting benched. It's a lot of years. A lot of years where that actually, you count 2023 as well because Sam left and Steve started the bowl game, but that's a little bit of a different story. That's not the same kind of
but you still that was the third starter that year because obviously Buckner starting the season.
No, I mean 23 when Sam Hartman.
Right.
22 was one where you
22.
had 2 different guys.
Yeah.
21 is the exception because I believe Jack Cohn started every game that year, but Jack Cohn didn't finish every game that year.
Correct.
Because Tyler came in against Virginia Tech, then Jack came back in. Tyler came in or Drew Pine came in and finished the Wisconsin game. And, so you had multiple times where somebody else needed to step up. So hopefully that'll be enough to convince them to stay, get your degree, and then have your opportunity to go somewhere else.
Like to our eyes, it's funny because as you and I talked about after we left practice Saturday, I guess it was, maybe the next day when we started to see like some of the things that other people were talking about that they saw in that practice. Like, even though it feels like, we should all be able to look at this and it's pretty obvious, like who we think the guy is, or at least, maybe like
who the two are,
whose cream is, closer to the, rising to the top. There's still going to be, it's still very subjective and people are still going to see sometimes what they want to see. And it can be the same in that room as well. You know, like how stubborn does a guy want to be, or not even stubborn, like how much does he feel like, I'm still in this thing. So, why should I leave?
And the flip side is true, Sean. You may be in it, but you don't feel that way. You don't have confidence that way. So you may jump in and they're like, dude, you were in the conversation. Like we thought you had a shot to do this. But and you don't know how they're feeling in that room. You really don't. So it's interesting.
Yep, exactly. Fill in the blank. Isaiah Stanback co-hosted Good Morning Football this week. And it was interesting. He was asked which coach or player that he would run through a wall for. And it's blank that he said it was his college coach at the University of Washington, the one and only Tyrone Willingham.
Not surprising. And are you surprised that I'm saying not surprising? See,
I am a little bit.
Here's why I say Ty Willingham was not a good football coach. He wasn't.
And that's what, to me, it's surprising.
But here's why it's not surprising, because the question wasn't who did the best job of coaching you up on the technique. It was who would you run. I've talked to a lot of Ty Willingham players over the years. They loved Ty Willingham. He was a good person.
Oh, yeah.
He was a good man. They respected him. He cared about him. He could give some decent speeches. I don't know that I've ever met a former Ty player that said a bad word about him other than they kind of knew they weren't being coached well. But they really liked the guy. They respected him. And I think that's why if he said, hey, we're going to go out and do this, which is why Ty had some weird upsets in his career.
Right.
It's like, how do you go on the road and beat number 9 Tennessee and then lose to whoever you lost to the next week? It's because of that. You just weren't prepared for it. But some of those games, those big games, he could just beat Michigan in, 2004? He could just get his team up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they respected him as a man. And that's why I'm not surprised by it. Plus, if he played at Washington, I mean, the other options of who he played for probably.
That's very true. Great. That's very true. There's a reason Tyrone Willingham ended up at Washington. Right. I just have to say, watching that and like hearing that segment and to hear Isaiah Stanback say it, like Tyrone Willingham was literally the last person, that I was, would have expected him to say. But then he said that. And then some of the things that he, kind of elaborated on were some of the things that you were talking about, the way he talked to him as a man and, like helped him out, not just in football, but in other aspects of his life. I guess I still didn't equate those two. Like he's the guy that I would run through a wall for.
You know what though? Young men, Sean, desire to be valued by grown men.
Sure.
Young men. That's why you see these like Marcus Freeman, all the success he has, still talks about his college. He's almost 40 years old. He's got 6 kids of his own. And he still talks about the impact. Jim Tressel, he has a dad who he loves and admires and looks up to, who is also a role model. So it's not like he's like, well, he didn't have a dad. No, but that's the impact that Jim Tressel still had on him, is because that young men want to be valued. They want to be told, no, you are good enough. I am going to challenge. I'm going to push you, not just in football, but over here and over here, because I care about you and I want the best for you. And when you can show a young man that you genuinely care about him, that you genuinely want to push him and help him be the best he can be, most of them respond incredibly well to that.
True.
And that's what Ty was good at. He just wasn't real good at teaching some
actual
of the other
football
things.
part of the thing.
And the recruiting thing was Ty's biggest problem. It's
Absolutely.
like you got the number one player in the country on campus and you're out golfing. That's a true story. No. But yeah.
Oh, I know.
I've told you that story, I think.
So who would be the player or coach you would run through the wall for, Brian Driscoll?
I can only point to people that I've played for or coached for. I mean, I mean, I'd like to say Lou Holtz, but I don't know. I mean, I had a coach that I worked for actually named Mike Donnelly, who has since passed away. Coach Donnelly was my first full-time coaching job. So I was an assistant at Wittenberg in 2001. It was kind of like I was finished on my degree, and I was able to coach tight ends, work with the quarterbacks. And it was kind of my first getting my feet wet in coaching. But my first, I've got to position to coach, I've got to recruit, I've got to do all that, was 2002 at Muhlenberg. And Mike Donnelly was our head coach. He had been the defensive coordinator at Columbia. And I always respected him because he was a guy that could have gone up the rank, Sean, but he chose to go down because he was a dad. He had 2 kids. They were young, and he wanted to just be part of their lives and be a dad. And you can't do that at the Division I level the way you can at the Division III level. So I always respected that as a man. But he was a great teacher. He was an honest guy. He was a good motivator. He's a guy that if I would have played for him, that's someone that I would have run through a wall for. He was a guy that I admired a great deal as a man, admired a great deal as a coach. And that's why that year we were as good as we were, because we had a talented team, but he could get the most out of it with how we prepared and those type of things. And and that's why we had the success we had.
Yeah. Mine is, I had 3 high school wrestling coaches in 4 years in high school. And mine is my first one, the guy that I had my freshman and sophomore year before he was unfortunately let go. It's kind of crazy how he was the best one and he's the one that they let go. But it was, kind of personality conflicts with administration.
Why I stayed out of high school coaching.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was tough on us, hard on us, made us hate him at times. But it wasn't because he was he wasn't a yeller screamer kind of guy. He just worked us, in a good way. Every practice felt like a death match at times, just like the way that we worked. And he always had this look, it was kind of, like a, just kind of a snide, sarcastic look that he could give you. And, that just got under your skin. And he just knew how to do all the little things and push the buttons that challenged you. And, just basically made you kind of say, F you, I'll show you, that kind of stuff. And, that was what, made you want to run through the wall for him, quite honestly, is you wanted to run through the wall to prove you could run through the wall, to try to get some kind of satisfaction out of the guy.
Which makes some coaches, that's how and it works.
Yeah.
It works. I mean, Lou Holtz, you'd hear Notre Dame players talk about Lou Holtz that way. Like, I'll show you, and that's exactly, what you don't realize until later is that's exactly what he wanted.
Yep.
It's like the scene from for Miracle when the assistant coach says about, he's like, they're all going to end up hating him. And the trainer's like, well, maybe if they hate him, then they don't think so much about how much they're hating each other. And the guy was like, just like the light bulb went off, like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But you don't think about it at the time. You're like, I hated that guy until you're 40 and then you're coaching and you're like, dude, I'm doing the same exact crap that the coach that I hated at the time did because it works.
That's exactly it. It works. That's it. Okay, so after shooting down Colorado's request to do joint practices with Syracuse, the NCAA is still going to look at the concept of doing joint spring practices in the future. Do you buy or sell this idea? I've been really curious. We haven't had a chance to talk about this, so I'm curious to see what you think about this, Brian.
I sell it unless they're going to extend the number of spring practices that you have. Okay. And which is why I may want to wait till your next one to give my full answer. So that way I don't double up because I know what your next one is. And that's going to, it's easier to explain it when I'm looking at from the fall and the spring together.
Well, I like the concept of it. I do wonder in the spring how much coaches really want their team, doing full contact with another team, because it just feels like, the adrenaline gets juiced up, egos, kind of get into the mix. Do you really want your team, having that kind of live contact against other bodies?
You've got to be smart about who you're going against, and you've got to be smart about how you're preparing them to go into it. You're not going to give them the rah-rah, let's go show, Indiana what we're made of, or Purdue what we're made of, or whatever, who you're scrimmaging against. Say, guys, we're here to get work done. But you see in the NFL, they have these brawls and stuff. I think a lot of times that's because you've got guys fighting for jobs and employment, and it's a little bit of a different animal. But for me, it's more of the concern of in spring, you're taking those kids out of class. Whoever has to travel, you're taking them out of class.
True.
How much work can you really do? I want to spend if I only got 14 practices plus my spring game. How many of those practices do I want to take away where we're kind of going against another team? I don't know if I want to do that as much. Where in the fall, when I've got 25, 30, I might be more willing to do some of that. But if they were willing to extend the spring and give me like just 3 or 4 more practices during the spring, let us extend a little bit more, then I would buy it. And I think you'd be able to maybe to do a little bit more. Maybe you do some summer stuff. There's some summer things you can do, some summer workouts where you can do something with them. I think there's other options. I just don't know that spring is the best of the 3 between spring, summer, and fall workouts. If spring makes the most sense, because what's the one difference between spring period and then summer and fall? In fall camp, you're not in class.
Right.
In summer, you're in class, but most of those kids in summer school are taking online classes.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a little easier to facilitate doing something together in those settings than it would be in spring.
Summer would be an interesting time. That's kind of intriguing to think about that.
Like a mini camp, something
yeah,
like that.
Exactly. Like a little 2 or 3 day kind of thing. And interesting. Okay, so you were kind of teasing it. This leads me into the next question. Fall preseason games or scrimmages. Kirk Ferentz has said that he would favor doing them as long as they don't count against a team's record. Would you buy or sell fall preseason games / scrimmages?
I would definitely buy that. And I think that's way more practical. And part of that's the level I came from. I came from the 1AA and Division III level where we always did have a scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
What I would still like to see is not so much a one-day scrimmage. I would still like to see a thing where you spend a few days there and you go through practices together. When you're doing one-on-ones, you're doing one-on-ones against that other team. Most of these schools, like Notre Dame, Sean, could absolutely have 3 teams doing a full practice together because of all the fields that they have. They have 4 fields.
Right.
And so you could certainly do that where, you're playing against, let's say Notre Dame is scrimmaging against Illinois because they don't play each other, right? So let's say the Illinois players, they're going to come here and they're going to spend 4 or 5 days here. They get their individual teaching. You have places for them to do film work, things like that. They have time in the strength program, all that kind of stuff. And then you come together and now it's okay. Now we're doing our one-on-ones with the receivers, DBs. We're doing one-on-ones over here with linebackers and running backs. And then you're doing some one-on-ones down here with O-line, D-line. And you're going against each other now, as opposed to your guys. And then you break and you maybe do some more teaching stuff. Maybe you do some special team stuff together like we normally see in a practice. Then you do inside run and 7-on-7. And then you do some more special teams against each other. And then you do some team stuff. Like that's going to be way more valuable than a scrimmage, a controlled scrimmage. In the scrimmage for me, I would make sort of situational as opposed to just a live 60-minute scrimmage. So then you kind of get away from the who won, who lost.
Okay.
And do more so like, okay, we're going to work on the coming out period. Coming out meaning like you're at your own 10. We're going to work on base stuff or it's at the 35. We're going to work on going in. So we're going to do sort of our 40-yard in. Then we're going to work on a red zone period where it's a bunch of team stuff and I would have some sort of competition, but not a competition that's necessarily where so-and-so beat so-and-so 27-24.
Right.
And I think you could get the same work, the same action out of that, but it's less concern of the who won, who lost stuff, which, can be a problem. The only caveat I have is you'd have to have some sort of rules about coaches recruiting players for the other team. That would be the only thing you'd have to somehow try to guard against.
Like you're not allowed to recruit anyone from the other team within the next calendar year.
Can't engage them in any way, shape, form, or fashion off the field.
Right.
Anything like that without coaches present.
Because Matt Rule would obviously be vehemently against this kind of thing.
Because I didn't know who your player was. I didn't recruit him out of high school apparently, but I watched him in a spring game and I want to poach him. Like, okay,
I've got to have him.
Yeah. But no, I would love something like that, Sean. I think that would be very advantageous for the players. I think it'd be very advantageous for the coaches because you know how it is. We hear it every year. By the time you get to those last 2 weeks of fall camp, I just want to go play somebody else. You know, it's like, how many times can I guard against the same team? Hey, the defense looked great. Yeah, they know what's coming. They literally play against the same plays every freaking day. There's only so much you can do. You know, hey, the offense is doing a great job picking up their blitz pickups. Yeah, I know they've seen all those blitzes before. I think it'd be really cool, like maybe 2 weeks before the first game, being able to do something like that in a controlled setting, in a practice setting. I think that'd be great. I'd buy the heck out of that. And guess what? 95 to or greater percentage of the schools, those kids are not in class during that.
Right.
And the only negative is the potential cost of the travel plus the hosting another team. But I mean, in today's era, that's minimal.
Seeing kind of how I thought of it, because like you're talking about, okay, Notre Dame against Illinois or Purdue, or, you know, like whatever. But what if you set it up so it's kind of, and you know, you brought some interesting ideas that I hadn't thought about in terms of like the actual scrimmage itself, you know, doing situational stuff as opposed to an actual game. I definitely like the 2 to 3 days of the joint practices, you know, together. I mean, it's basically, you know, what they do with, you know, joint practices and NFL training camp and stuff, because like you said, guys are tired of hitting, you know, their own players, and coaches, you know, really don't want their own players beating each other up. But I think you could accomplish a lot by just doing 2 to 3 days of that. What if you did it in a similar fashion where now, okay, you do that for 2 to 3 days, and then on Saturday, it's, you know, Notre Dame against a MAC team, or you bring an FCS team up, something along those lines. And maybe even, you know, again, we're saying that it's not going to count against your record, but maybe instead of, you know, playing Samford in the middle of the season, you know, like the SEC team has that kind of exhibition game up front, and you're still, you know, selling tickets to it, and you're still kind of doing, you know, like a pay game for these smaller
and you
schools
pay them to come up.
Yeah.
I would definitely not do with an FCS school. I still worry about, you know, especially in a scrimmage setting,
like it
there's
needs
always
to be
a greater risk of injury to the FCS players,
right?
You know, and
very true,
because then everybody starts doing an FCS team, and you kind of run into that little issue. But I would try to keep it regional as best I can. I'm okay if like Notre Dame wanted to bring Toledo over, as long as Toledo's up for it, you know, and then hey, we'll pay you and we'll give you a little extra something on the side. Kind of like what you're talking about. I didn't think about that. It's sort of like, instead of playing them in the regular season, I still value those games in the regular season, though. I really do. And I don't know that I would get as much out of practicing against Toledo's players as I would
Illinois or Purdue, you know, like a Big Ten school in the Northwestern.
I'd want something comparable. That's the whole point of a scrimmage, is you want to play somebody that gauges where are we, and you know, like if you know, if you're Notre Dame and you're bringing up Indiana State
and you're just mauling them, what are you actually getting?
I mean, the only advantage is we're just not beating each other up for a couple of days. We're beating somebody else up for a couple of days, but I don't know if that's necessarily what you're kind of looking for in that setting. That's why I say like an Illinois, a Northwestern, a Purdue, a Michigan State, even a MAC school would give you some value, but I would want something that's a little bit more comparable. I think you'd have to maybe set some rules on you know, geographically, you can only play someone within a certain region, but then you get into challenges, but we're all in the same conference. There is no other team from this region, but you know, it'd be interesting, but I think summer or fall camp are the best times to do that.
Yeah. But then, you know, like there's always the chance, if you do that, you know, you scrimmage them at the start of the season, you know, like say it was Indiana, and then you end up playing them in the playoffs at the end of the season, you know,
but you're going to be such a different team though by the time you get to the playoffs than you are in fall camp.
True.
And you're not, and that's why I like the practice type of thing as opposed to an actual game, because now we're in certain situations and we're working, because you're still in that experimental mode at that point in time in the season where we're working on some stuff. You know, you may run some play calls that you don't necessarily, you know, you're not sure if this is really what's going to work or not. You're just kind of working on some stuff. And that would be kind of my thing, is like, look, at the end of the day, if you're playing Indiana at the end of the season, they've seen everything you've got on film anyway.
True.
I don't know that there's going to be anything that they're going to gain from that, especially now. I mean, the only thing that I would do is I wouldn't signal during team. Just look, you've got the headpiece. You see the coaches at practice. They got the head. Just just tell them what the play is. You don't need to signal for those 3 days while they're there. And, because if you're recording the coaches putting signals in, that's not illegal. I mean, that's you're there. You're practicing with them.
Right.
It's
a practice. You can film anything you want.
I wouldn't signal, and there might be some terminology that I would maybe not utilize, or there'd be some things that you'd hold back. But I just think there'd be so many advantages to the 1-on-1, the 7-on-7s, the inside run periods, where I just think there'd be a lot of value to it. And, but if you're a team like in Illinois, or not North, but if your team you got to be careful. Like, do I really want to go play? If you're Toledo, do I really want to go scrimmage against Ohio State for 3 days and get our brains beat in and risk losing? That's always the concern. But my thing is, you run that risk playing against yourselves anyway. That's football.
Would you still sell tickets to the scrimmage? Would you want the public there if you did like the actual end of it, the scrimmage part of it?
I'm fine with that if they want to. I'm okay with that. I mean, NFL does that. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Do it in the stadium and give them a cut of the percentage of the gate. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah,
I'd be okay with that.
So yesterday we talked on the show here about changes that need to be made in sports. They ranged anywhere from rule changes to no game should start after 8 p.m. Eastern time. So my question is, I'm curious to see what you would say. If you could make one change in college football, what would it be?
So we're just going to tell the West Coast, F y'all. We don't care that you're on a different time zone. You got to start before 5.
The caveat was no game could start after 8 p.m. I'm sorry, it wasn't actually Eastern.
In their time zone?
Couldn't start, after 8 p.m. in the time zone that the game is being played in.
That I would support. I would support.
Yeah.
There's one off-field rule and one on-the-field rule that I would change. The on-the-field rule is simple. I was thinking of all these different rules. The overtime rule in college football sucks. I would go back to the old system, but start them at the 40.
I like that.
Instead of the 25, where you kind of got to get a first down. Yeah,
this 2-point shootout thing is ridiculous.
Stupid. It's absolutely dumb. I'd rather tie than that crap, honestly. Yeah. And I don't like ties. I think at the 40, there's a greater chance of getting stops at the 40 than at the 25, where you're literally in field goal range the minute you snap the first play.
Mm-hmm.
So I would start at the 40 and say, okay, same rules as they had before. That'd be my game rule. My other rule is, Sean, I think there's a lot of things wrong with NIL and all this kind of stuff. I'm supportive of NIL. I think the transfer portal rule needs a massive makeover. I would go back to where you have to sit out a year. If you transfer somewhere, barring if you're a graduate, you can go. I would also say that I'm a big fan of in your NLI, national letter of intent. If a school promised you something, they got to put it in your letter of intent. It's like a contract. And if
everything has to be up front,
you tell me I'm going to wear number 7 and you give me number 12, you violate it. And that may seem petty, but if you weren't going to give me number 7, then you shouldn't have promised it to me and you shouldn't put it in my contract.
Yeah.
You have to live up to certain expectations. And then there can be times where a school can release a kid. Hey, we're okay with this kid leaving, so we're going to release him and he can play right away. There's all types of things. There's all types of exceptions, genuine exceptions, not, some committee determines this kid does, but this kid doesn't, which was always stupid. The one thing I would change is you do not lose a year of eligibility as long as you are in good academic standing at the end of your term.
Okay.
You get that season back. So like if you redshirt, like right now, what hurts you is if I redshirt as a freshman and then transfer, I've lost a season of eligibility. Whereas if I redshirt as a freshman, transfer, as long as by the time I'm a senior, I'm in good academic standing, I would still have my 4th year. So that's how I'd get a 6th year. So I don't lose eligibility by transferring as long as you are in good academic standing, meaning you're on pace to graduate. You got to be a 2-2. Are you on pace to graduate in whatever time you set? Then you get that eligibility back. That's what I think. Because I think we're seeing Drew. This is the example I used. Does Drew Pine transfer if he had to sit out a year? Or would he?
I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't. Yeah.
The reason I use Drew Pine as an example is because I think Drew made a very obviously emotional decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Drew Pine. I think he's a great kid. I love that family. But Drew Pine was pissed off that he started all year, went 8-2, and Tyler was getting the job back and you were going to go to the portal. And I think he made an emotional decision that, look what happened. Whereas I think if Drew Pine would have had to he'd have been pissed. But if he'd had to make the decision of, do I really want to sit out a year and not play and then also not get my degree from Notre Dame? Or do I just stay, get my degree, and then transfer? And I'd even be supportive of them coming up with a rule where a kid can choose not to play that year and get his degree and then leave in a certain instance and get his eligibility back.
Still keep
I'm
the
all
eligibility.
about doing making sure they're actually student athletes again. We've lost that. These kids going to 5 schools in 5 years are not leaving with an education. You may give them a piece of paper that says graduate. They learned nothing. You can't learn anything when you're leaving that much. But I think if Drew Pine had to sit out a year, he probably comes back. He probably competes against Sam Hartman and then doesn't start. You could get his degree, and then he's still got 2 years to play somewhere else. And not only, so yeah, he's probably at Bowling Green anyway. He'd be a 2-year max starter. He'd have a degree from Notre Dame and a master's from somewhere else. And he has a much different looking career as opposed to going from South Bend to Tempe to Columbia, now to Bowling Green.
Yeah.
Without a Notre Dame degree. And yeah, that's why I think that rule absolutely needs to change.
The only tweak I would make to all of that is I would give, you get 1 free transfer after that. You know, if you transfer a second time, then you have to sit out.
Yeah, I get that. I just think that still opens up because here's the thing, Sean, you're not going to tamper for a kid that you're not going to have that next year. Like
that's true.
You're just not.
That's true.
And kids are less likely.
That's a good point. Yeah. It's going to cut down on a ton of that stuff.
Yes.
If the guy has to sit for
exactly. And I still feel like
that's probably the only way you're going to eliminate,
because in your situation, like Drew Pine still has the freedom to make that emotional decision, or not the freedom. Sure. He's always had the freedom. This whole thing. Well, players should be allowed to leave. If
he's more likely than not
allowed.
He's going to sit on that a little bit longer.
Exactly.
And think about
it's going to be less of an emotional decision.
Yeah.
Kids have always been free to transfer. Always. You have to understand, if you're going to transfer, you have to sit out a year, barring these clearly defined things that could allow you to leave. That's what I would do.
Okay. I mean, it all makes a lot of sense. I can see all your points on that. And again, like, well, I already said my piece on it.
I'd still say the one-time transfer thing. If you couldn't go back to my rule completely, but I'd be one to accept the one-time transfer thing if that was my only option.
Sure,
absolutely, because that's still better. Because you can't make the second
bouncing 3 years in a row. Yeah,
exactly. That's still I would if that was my hey Brian, you can't have what you want. You can either have Sean's idea or we're going to keep it the way that it is. I'd say give me Sean's idea in a heartbeat. It's
or you can go back to your original school if they want you, and you don't have to sit out a year,
right?
Like something like that. I don't know. Yep. So my changes for college football. I talked about this yesterday. The targeting rule. I despise the targeting rule in college football. I would like to see. First time you flag a guy for targeting, it's just a personal foul, 15 yards. Second time, that's the ejection. If he does it a second time in the game, that's the ejection.
Which is the personal foul rule.
Right.
You get 2 personal fouls, you get kicked out. I love that rule. I'm with you on that. Here's one thing I would add to that, Sean, is if you get called for targeting and it's not a personal foul type of hit, they can review that during the break and remove the targeting from it.
Like so you happen to hit the helmet, but it's not like you're not, so you get leading with the ground spearing type thing.
Like I would not review any targeting calls in the moment. It's a 15-yard penalty. If the ref got it wrong, you got it wrong. The review would only be to remove the targeting from the player to where now it doesn't count towards his 2 for an ejection. Does that make sense? Like, so still refs miss holding calls. You don't review it and then take it back.
Right.
Why is targeting rule the one? Because there's an ejection tied to it. You take the ejection out, we don't need to review it anymore.
Exactly.
They can go back and look and say, okay, hey, during the break, we reviewed this play. We've removed the targeting strike against the player because it wasn't targeting. He actually didn't lead with the crown or whatever. And then now he still has two left. That's the only thing I would add. I love your rule. I would still only, and I would get rid of the review of it, except for what we just said, which is it can be removed. It doesn't affect the play anymore. It's something you announce during a break after you come back from a TV timeout. FYI, 14 strike for the thing has been removed, and then play on.
I like it. I like it. Makes a lot of sense. My other one is college instant replay. I don't like the system. The NFL has a system that is much more efficient. It's like you don't have to look at every single play. In theory, every single play in a college football game can be stopped down and looked at it. And I just think that it's too much. It's a pretty simple system that the NFL has. I think it makes a heck of a lot more sense, just to have the straight up challenge flag system. You win the challenge, you get to keep it. Not, you lose it and you move on. It just makes more sense to me, because I just think that there is too much stopping down in college football, that creates just too much downtime over the course of what's already a long game.
I know this is rapid fire. Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Isaac Sally brought up a thing about the transfer rule. I am a believer that a head coach leaving should allow any player to jump in the portal. The only rule I have is that once the head coach, I would put a pause on it, and I would give the new coach a week to meet with all the players and make his pitch to keep them there. And then I would then open up the window and let anyone transfer. Because if a coach leaves, if you fire a head coach, portal opens up for your whole team. If a coach leaves you, then I think there should be some protections for the school to give the new coach a chance to try to convince those players to stay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like you're screwing a school twice. Their coach screwed you, and now he screwed you by your players can go. If you fire a coach, it's fair game. You chose to fire him. You as a school made that choice. If a head coach leaves on his own, I would say let the coach you got a certain window to hire a coach. If you don't hire a coach within that window, then sorry, we can't hold up for these kids to leave. But if you hire a coach within a window, that coach then gets a week to convince kids to stay. Then the portal opens and anyone that wants to go in can go in. At least that way the coach gets his chance to convince kids to stay. So, Isaac, I misread your initial quote. That's my one transfer caveat that I would have, because I do think if a coach leaves, then why should the players be beholden to that program? You can say all you want. You don't commit to a coach. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Come on. My coach is an a-hole and I don't like anybody there, but it's a good school, so I'm going to go. No, that never happens. You're going to play for someone who's going to develop you as a young man. So, yes, you do commit to the coach as well as the school.
All right. You're a fan of the movie Draft Day, Brian, correct?
Yes.
So if they made the movie today, remade, made it from scratch, whatever, if they did it today, who would play Kevin Costner's Sonny Weaver and who would play Dennis Leary's Coach Penn?
Oh, my gosh. Man, that's a good one. Because Dennis Leary was not believable as a football coach.
I didn't think so either. I thought it was bridge too far.
The best head coach in a movie ever was Denzel, and Remember the Titans. So I kind of have to go with Denzel, right?
Not a bad one.
He was the best head coach in a movie. So yeah, I'd probably have to go with Denzel as the head coach. The GM would have to be some guy that's kind of a little bit of snake oil salesman. You're like, I don't know if I trust this guy, business type of guy. Trying to think of who I think actually would fit John Krasinski.
Oh, that's not bad.
He just for whatever reason just strikes me sort of like, that'd be a decent one. Yeah,
I like that one. I like that one. So it's funny you said snake oil salesman, because the first person I thought of when you said that, it's like, you just put Leonardo DiCaprio in there. Because
there you go.
Like he could easily,
there you go.
Be that guy.
He'd more be like the owner.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. My two candidates for the GM, though, probably not too far off, Leo. Brad Pitt, I think, would make a lot of sense. Obviously, he played a GM in Moneyball.
As long as he's eating every time he's doing a scene.
He's going to eat anything. I feel like Tom Cruise would be pretty good in that role as well. He's obviously not going to have the height of a Kevin Costner.
Sure.
I feel like Cruise could pull that off. And my coaches, I didn't think about Denzel when I was thinking about mine, but like Friday Night Lights, whether it's the movie or the TV show, I don't feel like you could go wrong with either Billy Bob Thornton or Kyle Chandler.
I kind of like the Kyle Chandler role a little bit better, especially for an NFL head coach.
Right.
I think Billy Bob more fits the high school type of mold.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because you could definitely for an NFL head coach, you could definitely see Kyle Chandler doing that.
I'm not a big fan of him as an actor, but I also think a potential GM candidate would be Ben Affleck. He kind of strikes me as someone who might fit that role pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like GMs nowadays are usually a little bit younger. They're not like the older guys like they used to be.
True.
So you want someone who's got a little bit of youth to him.
And he's a pretty big guy too. So like you could
Yeah.
believe him as like maybe like a former
football
player or something like that. Yeah. Someone who's been around the game a little bit. I like that.
Yeah. Somebody said John Hamm he'd be a good
It's not
GM
bad.
pick.
Yeah.
I think John Hamm might actually fit better as a coach. He's got a little bit more of that scruffy coach kind of feel to him a little bit.
Right. You said that, and I thought about Jason Sudeikis and Ted Lasso, but I don't feel like
if it's
like
a comedy
this movie, yeah.
sure.
If it was a comedy,
if we're redoing Draft Day and we're making it a comedy, sure.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a comedy, I would have him and oh gosh, I can't even. What's the name is escaping me now?
Steve Carell.
No,
Steve Carell would be a great GM in a comedy.
Yeah.
A great GM in a comedy. Make Ted Lasso not Ted Lasso. Make Jason Sudeikis a coach and Steve
Carell is the GM,
GM.
You know, like the absent-minded professor,
Yes.
kind of thing.
You made what trade? That'd be pretty good. That'd be good.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight. That's going to do it for Rapid Fire as we zipped right through that. Ben Stiller is the coach. That's not a bad one either. Like, again, if you were doing the comedy route, Ben Stiller. All right. That's going to do it. Hit the like button before you leave. And, of course, subscribe, rate, review. Had a great time, Brian. It's been like at least a year since we did.
So I'll see you next April.
A show and a Rapid Fire together. That's right. End of next spring. This will be our new tradition. End of
Which
every
2027 commit are we going to be doing this show for next year? That'll be the prediction.
That's right. All right. We will talk to you next time on IB Nation Sports Talk.